You cannot simultaneously want to drink super inexpensively and want your wine to be organic, maybe biodynamic, as natural as it can be. That just doesn't compute because the least expensive wines tend to be the most manipulated wines. That's how they get to be drinkable for only $5 a bottle.
You've mentioned that these cheaper wines are often stripped down, like they've been neutered because the base grapes are not that great. And then they've been rebuilt back up with oak chips, or they're adding dyes or whatever they put back in, but it's all to keep the cost down.
Yeah. As long as you know that, then you're an informed consumer.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie MacNeil, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 210. Which new and emerging wine regions should be on your radar to try soon? Why should you pay more for wine? And how does glassware change the taste of your wine? You'll hear those tips and stories in part 2 of our chat with Karen MacNeil, author of The Wine Bible, the single best-selling wine book in North America with more than 1 million copies sold. Karen's just published the 3rd edition of the book, and it is gorgeous. It's a full-color, 700-page masterwork. 3 of you in the continental U.S. are going to win a signed copy of her book. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com and let me know you want to win. I'll choose 3 people randomly. Now, a quick update on my upcoming memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. Every time I get closer to finishing a manuscript for a book, I start emailing an electronic copy of it every day to my mother. That's because I have an irrational fear that I'm going to be hit by a bus or some other disaster, and my book will never see the light of day. It's one thing if your book is nowhere near finished, but it's quite another when it's close to the end. Call me morbid, but my sense of urgency feels like a flame to get this message out into the world and not let it die on the page or in a computer file somewhere. I'm also starting to get that feeling that writing this book is the last thing I could do, and that would be okay. I've done what I was made to do on this planet, and I've answered my highest calling. I'll share a review from you now from Mark Ball, who is a beta reader from Toronto. Quote, suspenseful. I kept racing ahead to find out what happened next. Anyone who's been through a traumatic life event, death, relationship, job loss, etc., will relate to so much of what she experienced and the emotions she shares. Natalie shares things that almost all readers can relate to. There's also practical advice and encouragement for a better future. In terms of the attacks, from personal relationships to professional ones, we've all experienced something similar. Professionally, I doubt many of us have been hammered to the extent that she was, but many of us have felt that was happening behind our backs. As for the industry impact, there is a lot that needs to be brought into the light. References to Anthony Bourdain are well-founded, with the strength of voice in Me Too. There are new voices that need to be heard who speak not just to scores and technical details of wine, but also to the emotional feel of wine, circumstances, that energy and passion that is brought to her media hits. Keep doing what you're doing, Natalie. I believe Katharine Hepburn said, quote, if you obey all the rules, you'll miss all the fun. End quote, stay strong. Thank you, Mark. I've posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/210. This is where I share more behind-the-scenes stories about the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at this manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. Okay, on with the show. Now, you have several new regions that are part of this book. Which ones are they, and why did you choose to include them?
One of them that I just loved writing about was the chapter on Great Britain. England is a fast up-and-coming wine region, and English wine country is about just an hour south of London, so it's easy to get to. But it turns out, as you would know, that that big arc of limestone that starts in Champagne kind of arcs up over Paris, becomes the White Cliffs of Dover, then goes right down underneath what are called the North and South Downs, DOWNS, of southern England. And so the sparkling wines there are fantastic. They bear such a tremendous similarity to Champagne, but have their own freshness about them because southern England, unlike Champagne, is a coastal region. So they're just went there for the first time in 2018. And I was just so astounded by the quality. If you had said to me 20 years ago, all wine books will one day have a chapter on Great Britain, I would think probably not. But that's one of the places that global warming has been kind to. In most other regions, global warming has been climate chaos. It's been very devastating.
It has been, yeah, that's true.
But I loved writing that. And I loved writing a new chapter I put in called Wine in the Ancient World.
Oh, yes, right.
And that was very hard to write about. And the reason I put it in part, was because I knew it was going to be hard to write about. Because if someone just in a restaurant leaned over to me and said, okay, so describe wine in the ancient world, I'd be like,
where to start?
I mean, where did wine begin? Because we all hear, wine began in Armenia or Israel or Turkey or China. Where did it begin and when did it begin? So as I did the research for that chapter, I had to make myself a handwritten chart to just get equalized times, because one person's 5,000 BC is another anthropologist 7,000 years ago. This happened. And then some scientists speak of, this happened in the Paleolithic era, and this happened during the Iron Age.
Wow.
So, I had to make all that equal. And then I realized, oh no, something I didn't know before. And that's that those ages, the Neolithic age in particular, is different by country. So the Neolithic era, which is the most important one for wine, is different in China than it is in the Near East, in Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Western Turkey.
Is that due to climate or was it due to just societal development?
Yes, societal development. The Neolithic era is when pottery is invented. Okay. And so that happens earlier in China than it does in Europe. And pottery was critical because for the first time, humans could store liquids and solids. And that led to permanent settlements where people lived permanently instead of being nomadic. And that led to the domestication of crops, including grapevines as vineyards.
Wow, it all fits together. It's great.
It really does.
Brought it together.
It's that Neolithic, that's the one age now I really know pottery is invented and everything is like a domino from that point on.
Huh. Wow, there you go. Okay, and so what was the most difficult region to research?
I made the mistake in Wine Bible 1 of leaving Italy and Germany to the end.
Oh, okay.
This is the biggest mistake a writer can make because it's a little bit like running a marathon. You're going to spend years on this book, and you have to be your own motivator because no one's going to see it, right? It's very solitary. It's not like someone is saying, good job, good work, love this chapter. You're just there with yourself and words. You know this, you've written several
It's true.
books. And so I thought, oh boy, do not leave places that are hard to write about, hard from a research standpoint to the end when you're already getting kind of tired from all this
Sure.
writing. So I think I wrote Italy second this time. I wrote Oregon first
Okay.
because you got to
Got to
ease
warm up.
yourself
A little
into.
stretching with
That's right.
Oregon.
Exactly. And then Italy, you just want to say chaos, turn the page. I love Italy, but figuring out Italy has a very loose relationship with the rules. So they are, for everything you can say, you could make 5 cases of people who never do it that way. No, it isn't that variety.
Yes.
Yeah, Italy's a
And you've
challenge.
also mentioned that
Germany's
Italy is
complex.
acronym hell. I think you've mentioned that before.
Yes, it is. DOC, DOCG, IGT, DPI.
NBD, no big deal. I mean, it's just good.
I know.
Wow.
MGAs now. I mean, wait,
Yeah.
what is all this?
It's true. Oh my goodness. And so was there a tough region for this edition to research? Like you got up front with Italy, but was there another one?
Yeah. Greece is always very hard to research because it's hard to find sources of actual information apart from the wineries themselves. And also because of a very simple fact, which is that some wines are written about, it's a very mixed up way that I think that they have appellations. Okay. Anything that you want to write about could be written in English, Greek, using the Greek alphabet, a kind of translated version of English into sort of modern Greek. So you have to line up names that can be very hard and decide what you're going to call these places, which sometimes have 4 names for the same either place or idea. So Greece is a bit of a challenge. China can be a statistical challenge because the way they collect information in China is hard. And Germany was hard this time because there are almost now 2 parallel systems by which you can find German wines. And I felt like I needed to explain them both.
Wow. Thank you for your service.
Anyway.
Was Canada a challenge at all?
Canada.
We're sorry.
What is with you guys?
I'm going to say it. We're sorry. We're always sorry for everything.
I love Canadian wine. Canada makes such delicious wines, both in Ontario and in British Columbia. But the problem there is they're not sold in the United States, which makes no sense. California wines are sold in Canada. It should be reciprocal.
Oh, yeah. It's easier for us to get California wines here in Ontario than for us to get BC wines from our own country shipping across. Yeah. The shipping is a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. And so trying to get samples of some of the Canadian wines that I wanted to try that I hadn't was very hard. I actually had to ask, I won't say who, but I had to ask a Canadian journalist friend to round up certain samples for me and send them to me as olive oil.
Smuggling ring.
Whatever.
Yes, that's the way you have to do it. It's like right back to Prohibition days. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
It's so Canada. Here's another place where the situation with the climate may be beneficial.
Perhaps.
Cool northern places like Canada have, in all kinds of ways, such a beautiful future ahead of them.
We hope so. But, you've mentioned climate chaos. I've heard the term climate or global weirding, and we certainly have experienced that, with late frosts or freak hailstorms or whatever. But yeah, we shall see. And you've mentioned some interesting things in other conversations that you've had. You referenced a scientific study that said all grapevines could be extinct in 28 years, grapevines made for wine.
It's astounding. The phrase that rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, meaning that people are focused on little things when there's an enormous threat at hand. And yes, the more one looks into the climate issue, the more alarmed you become because it isn't a matter of just let's plant more trees to sequester more carbon. Whole crops are in danger of going extinct within the next 30 years. And it's worrisome for grapevines, especially Vitis vinifera, because the species Vitis vinifera, to which all of the wines we normally drink belong, Pinot Gris, Riesling, Cabernet, Chardonnay, etc., is in what is known as an indicator crop. It's very sensitive to changes in climate, to changes in water supply. And so, yes, grapevines could well begin to go extinct in about 28 years.
So it's not a matter of that they would just migrate north and find new homes. They could still become extinct even so.
It's helpful to move north, but some varieties that are very tentative varieties, there are a lot of grape varieties in the world, many of which have been rescued from near extinction in places like Greece and Italy and Turkey and Armenia recently, and Georgia, of course. But the idea that we're going to rescue very fragile varieties probably will cease to happen as people begin to think, never mind all these obscure varieties. Can we keep Pinot Noir going, right? Can we keep it going in Canada, in Sweden, in Denmark, or high in the Himalayas? Or the turbulence is going to get rocky pretty quickly here.
What can we do as wine drinkers to our small part or whatever? What can we do with our buying choices to help mitigate the impact of climate change?
It's hard to know, and it's frustrating because so many people, I think, would be willing to help if there was a way. One of the things that we as consumers will soon face and will need to accept is that wine probably within the next 20 years will no longer be sold in glass bottles.
Okay.
One of the winery's biggest carbon footprints comes from glass bottles. And glass bottles for wine are never reused. Most glass, even when you put it in the recycling in the United States, I think the percentage is truly only about 35% of glass gets recycled.
Wow.
But glass, to make glass, right, you have to burn fossil fuels in huge furnaces, most of which are either in Asia, in China, or in Europe. And glass is heavy to transport, and so consumes a lot of fossil fuels that way. And the world is running out of sand, a main component in glass.
Oh, wow.
So glass is a big problem. And pretty soon, when we see wine coming in either paper glass bottles or other kinds of delivery mechanisms similar to bag-in-the-box, I think we're going to have to accept that.
Embrace it. And at least as a starter, stop buying those extra heavy glass bottles that say, hey, I'm a good wine. It's like, how about you just prove yourself by what's inside the bottle? But yeah. And then the other thing I think you had suggested was paying more for wine, because pricier wines tend to be less manipulated.
Yeah, I'm always troubled when people talk about how expensive they believe wine to be. And the wine that I recommended was $35 US. So I send the article in, and the editor calls me up and she said, $35? That's a huge amount. Who's going to buy a wine for $35? I said, And so I'm thinking about this magazine, and I said, your magazine headquarters is on Madison Avenue, right? Like Madison in the 50s or 60s. She said, yes. I said, and you, are you a tea drinker, coffee drinker? Coffee drinker, great, lattes. What does a latte cost on Madison Avenue in New York these days? She says, it costs $6. I said, and you drink 2 a day? Yeah, 2 a day. Great, $12 on beverages. Thank you, because this wine costs $8 a glass. It's not $35.
Right.
It's $8.
It's true.
Right?
That is true.
And that simple math, we forget. We forget that we're okay, we're a $40 bottle of champagne. You're not splurging with $40. you're giving yourself an $8 gift. It's fine in a sense. Well, hopefully. And there are certainly a lot of wonderful wines that cost a lot less even than that. But I do think that you cannot simultaneously want to drink super inexpensively and want your wine to be organic, maybe biodynamic, as natural as it can be. That just doesn't compute because the least expensive wines tend to be the most manipulated wines. That's how they get to be drinkable for only $5 a bottle. So you can't kind of have it both ways. And there are times when I am just shocked that a beautiful wine can really even make it here for $20 a bottle. I'm writing about one today in our digital newsletter, Wine Speed. It's a Spanish wine it's a garnacha made in a place called Campo de Borja. And it's $20. And I think, oh my God, this is astounding. I actually want to call them up and say, you need to charge more for this because it must be very hard to produce such a beautiful wine at such a reasonable cost.
That is true. And you've mentioned that these cheaper wines, like really cheap wines, are often, they're stripped down, like they've been neutered almost because what's there, the base grapes are not that great. And then they've been rebuilt back up with oak chips or whatever they're adding, dyes or whatever they put back in and rebuilt, but not in a very authentic way, but it's all to keep the cost down. So,
yeah. So, I mean, as long as you know that, then you're an informed consumer. But the idea that a wine like Two Buck Chuck, that there's a vineyard somewhere that is pristine and beautifully cared for, and isn't this Two Buck Chuck delicious, is just not the case. That wine it could be an oil refinery. Yes. It is being highly manipulated to give you a beverage that is palatable and has alcohol in it, but it is certainly not from one of the world's great cared for vineyards.
Absolutely. So I'd love to know, you've also got a section in your book, you add in historic food and wine pairings. What was the most interesting one that you discovered along the way?
I love to write about the foods of any given wine region. And all of the top chapters have foods of that region, which are different than foods to go with that wine. When it comes to food and wine pairing, I always say that it's more important to match wine to mood than to match wine to food. I really believe that. But that said, wine regions are often, because people are thinking about flavor, they're often really great food regions. So researching the history, the foods that have been traditional in the region is one way of, it's kind of like end running and tackling wine from the other side. But there are interesting facts when you do that. I mean, I only discovered by researching the wines of Austria, I discovered that so-called French croissants are not French. They began in Austria. And the other night I was drinking an Amarone from northern Italy, famous wine, Amarone. And I asked the people I was with, do you know what the traditional dish is where Amarone is made? And in fact, many people to this day drink Amarone with this dish. And people thought, nobody raised their hand. This was a class I was giving. And it turns out that the traditional dish with Amarone is horse meat.
Oh.
And to this day, in the Veneto, in the region where Amarone is made, there are separate butchers. You can't sell horse meat in Italy in the same physical store as you sell beef and chicken, and it has to have its own store. It's very traditional to have horse meat in Amarone.
Sorry, why did they separate it? I'm just curious. Why wouldn't they allow it to be in grocery stores?
I think because during the World Wars, horse meat, Northern Italy was very poor, and eating horse meat was very common.
Okay.
After the World Wars, both 1 and 2, when Italy regained some financial stability, some people cut corners saying that horse meat was beef. when it was
Okay.
not. And so to mitigate false practices, deceptive practices, a very simple and interesting solution was, well, they just can't be sold in the same store.
Okay. All right.
But those sorts of things are
Yeah.
fascinating to me because they tell you about the people, the culture. A lot of cuisine in Europe is poor people's cuisine, especially because of World Wars One and Two. And so maybe too, because I started out as a food writer, I'm always fascinated by the foods of a
Yes,
place.
absolutely. And what's your favorite sort of strange or weird wine and food pairing?
One of the ones that I love is I'm a big cookie person. I love cookies. So I know
No,
it's terrible,
no.
but
There's no guilty pleasure. There's just pleasure. Embrace it.
yeah, I love chocolate chip
Mm.
cookies with
Oh,
Madeira.
that's inspired.
Yeah, chocolate chip cookies are, first of all, of course, great. Who doesn't like a chocolate chip cookie? But Madeira is such a fascinating wine, not only because of the unique way it's made and the painstakingly long way that it's made, but also because during the birth of America, or rather, birth of the United States, at that time, Madeira was very fashionable. Madeira parties were the forerunners of cocktail
Huh.
parties in the United States. Madeira was the wine that was drunk at the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the US, the writing of the Star Spangled Banner. It was the wine served at all the continental congresses. It had very strong patriotic associations. And we've kind of forgotten that these days in the US, but it's a spectacular beverage. And it's great with chocolate
Oh,
chip
wow.
cookies.
Yeah. Well, it's fortified, it's sweet, but it's also very layered. And yeah, it would definitely stand up to those cookies. That is great. All right. Now, you have this section on mastering wine. You talk about glassware, but I just thought this would be a good opportunity to ask about your own glassware. Why is glassware important? And then what was the idea behind your own line of glassware?
Yes, glassware is easy to prove to yourself its importance by getting a good glass and tasting the same wine in that glass and then two or three other either wine glasses or it could be a jelly jar, anything. And it's not entirely clear scientifically exactly what is happening, but every wine lover who's ever done this knows that, glass shape, size, dimension profoundly affects the flavor of the wine. And in the last few years, I suppose it started in the 1980s with George Riedel, but in the last few years, a number of fabulous glasses have come on the market. Among connoisseurs, Zalto glasses or Gabriel glass or Jancis Robinson's fabulous glass are all available now. For me, the problem was that all of those glasses are about $50 or more per stem.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the behaviors that makes complete sense is that the more expensive the glass, the less someone is likely to
It's
use
true.
it because you don't want to break
Exactly.
something that costs
Yeah.
$50. And so you don't handle it as much. And pretty soon, the beautiful glasses that you bought are back in their box and in the attic or in the
Mm-hmm.
basement. So I wanted to see if I could design a glass that was really good for wine, that was easy to understand, and that would cost about $10 a stem instead of $50 a
Well,
stem. And the more I thought about and researched glasses, I realized two things. One is that glasses represent something that the wine industry does all the time, which is that you have to know something to know something, which drives me
it's a good way to
crazy.
put it.
Like the best example is, like the burgundy glass. Well, okay, in order to know how to use the burgundy glass, you have to know what
Mhm.
burgundy is. What does that mean? Why is this a burgundy glass?
And what grape is it? You
What
really have
grape
to.
variety is it? Exactly. So
Yep.
you have to know something to know something. And I thought, why are glasses named after wine regions anyway? Why is there a Bordeaux glass and a Burgundy glass? And then an offshoot of that is, well, if every glass is named for a variety, Now you have to know something about Sangiovese to drink out of the Sangiovese glass versus the Tempranillo glass or the Zinfandel glass.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this, as I'm thinking about it, walking down the street, I thought to myself, why can't glasses just be named for flavor? Because I know as a teacher, and you do too, that when you ask people what kind of wine they like, people usually answer very simply, I like big reds, or, I like crisp whites. So this caused me to do a 2-year experiment with different glass shapes and trying to figure out what were the key ideas about a glass that caused wine to be different. And then, could you design glasses around flavor? Could there be a glass for bold and powerful wines, a glass for fresh and crisp wines, a glass for creamy and silky wines? And those are the 3
Ah,
glasses in my Flavor First collection.
okay.
So it's called the Flavor First collection by Karen MacNeil. They're all the same height. Who wants different heights of glasses in their cabinet or in their
That's
dishwasher?
true.
And they're designed for those 3 styles of wine. So into the fresh and crisp glass, you could put rosé, you could put Pinot Grigio, you could put Champagne, you could put Prosecco, you could put Sauvignon
Could you put a
Blanc.
red in there or? Okay.
Yes, you could put a red
Okay.
in there. Actually, Sangiovese tastes
Ah,
quite good
okay.
in the fresh and crisp
Okay.
glass.
That's a great concept. And they can go in the dishwasher too.
Oh,
That's
absolutely,
good.
because, they have to go in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. We
dishwasher.
don't
Yeah,
have someone we can call in to clean all the, the glassware.
exactly. Yes.
All right. Oh my goodness. I just have so many more questions, and this will end up being as long as the wine Bible if I keep going here. But let me just scroll down here because I just want to maybe perhaps get to the lightning round here. Karen, is there something that you believe about wine with which some people would disagree?
Hmm. Well, I think the idea that you don't have to match wine and food all the time, there would be people who would disagree with that. Something else that is maybe controversial is I don't think there should be white wine glasses. I don't think white wine glasses should exist.
Huh.
The whole premise of white wine glasses, probably historically, was that white wine was somehow lesser than red wine and it should be more dainty, kind of like women,
Right.
smaller.
Right. Yeah.
That makes no
Okay.
sense. What else would I don't know. I'm going to think more about
That's
that,
fine.
Natalie. That's a good
That's fine.
question.
Is there been a useful wine gadget you've come across? Of course, your own glassware. Is there anything else that you've discovered that you really love to use?
I could not live without a bouchon, one
Ah,
of those stoppers that you put in sparkling wine and
okay.
champagne. In fact, one is in my suitcase
Oh,
right now because who knows when someone might open up a bottle of champagne and you want to keep those bubbles in. So
yes.
I love those bouchons and we have tons of them in my office. They're not expensive. You can get them on Amazon for $15 and they'll keep a bottle of sparkling wine or champagne fresh for a
Oh,
week.
okay. Because that leads me to one question I did mean to ask you. I've heard you have a glass of champagne every night. Is that true?
It is true. I don't drive a very fancy car, and I'm pretty modest when it comes to clothes. But I think a glass of champagne every night is the way I love to sort of demarcate the day from the night. And even in my office, if we're working, let's say it's 6 o'clock, everybody knows we're going to open a bottle of champagne. People can work with a glass of champagne beside the computer. And besides, it's really indispensable to marital harmony. I love
That's right. Save more marriages than orange juice for sure.
Yeah, and patience. All patience is derived from a glass
That's
of champagne,
true.
I'm pretty
That's
sure.
true. That decompression, but also just slowing you down in the moment with your partner or whomever, or just inside yourself. That is what wine does
Yes.
for sure. Do you ever worry about wine consumption as a woman? Because, we're hearing these guidelines all the time and they've reduced them again for women in terms of how much we should be consuming a week. Or do you think about that much?
I do think about it. We are in a business where we have to be careful when we do tastings, which we do in my office every week. we always are spitting. For me, there's no going out and just drinking with the guys for the sake of drinking. I have trained myself since the time of being a young woman to try and really concentrate a lot on a wine so that I don't have to take 5 sips to understand it. I can maybe get the wine well in 3
Sure.
sips, especially in situations which I know you're in as well all the time. There are 25 wines in front of you. You can't even spitting. You shouldn't be tasting each wine 5 times to be able to write well about it.
True.
And the other thing I suppose I do is in all other ways, I try and keep very healthy.
Mm.
I exercise a lot, I eat well, I don't smoke. So maybe I'm above the average in consumption for most women, but I'm doing good other things,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess.
absolutely. No, everyone has to sort of reconcile with themselves their lifestyle choices. But yes, I'm like you. I try to be extra healthy in all other respects. But I do think sometimes that, one of the biggest killers is stress. And I think if we can have wine in moderation, that can go a long way and perhaps do a lot more good than other things. But anyway, it's an
Yeah,
individual choice.
beautifully said.
Thank you. So, if you could have a bottle of wine with any person, living or dead, who would that be? What bottle might you open and what might you ask that person?
Well, there are 2 people who I would be fascinated to talk to. One would be the former American president, Barack
Mm,
Obama, the first Black president, because his road to the top could not have been easy, right?
absolutely.
I can't even imagine what internal core of determination it took for him as a Black man to become the president. He has to be a fascinating
Hmm.
person. And I also think, in that same vein, in a sense, that it would be fascinating to talk to Hillary Clinton. Here she was, a woman at the apex, and to have to suffer the failure of not quite making it to the
Yes.
presidency. That also, how she dealt with that, what had to have been a crushing disappointment after spending her whole life, in that race to the top, and then have it not come to be. She would be very interesting to share a bottle of wine with. And I would be happy to drink anything if I could talk to those 2
Even that
people.
Bulgarian red?
Maybe. It
Maybe.
might be time to
Oh,
bring out the
yeah.
Bulgarian red.
That's true.
Yeah.
Probably have a line. Yeah, those two would be fascinating. And really, Karen, I mean, they came, from such humble circumstances and rose to the top. I mean, there's a strong parallel to your own rise. I mean, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, your story is movie material. I hope you will consider writing a memoir someday.
Maybe. Let's see.
Maybe. Okay. Yeah. No commitments. Not while you're working on the fifth edition. Okay. So perhaps we'll end with this before we wrap up and you can give us all your website details and the newsletter that you publish. But do you have 3 words that could describe you as a little girl?
Hmm. Probably determined, creative. And I think if I said as a little girl, probably
Mm,
afraid.
sure.
I think even though I give a lot of presentations, I think I'm essentially a shy
Mhm.
person and something of an introvert. And that often manifests as a bit fearful, but also because of the polio when I was little, because I couldn't trust my body in a way, I was afraid of many
Wow.
things. So luckily, I was also determined. One of the things to be determined about is to get over your fear and start doing
Huh.
stuff.
That is incredible. And 3 words that might describe you today.
Oh, I'm really determined now.
Extra, extra, extra. Those are the 3 words.
Extra determined.
That's great.
I think I'm determined. I think I'm kind. And I think I'm endlessly curious. I'm just endlessly curious. It's why the Wine Bible has so many people say, "Oh, that's so fascinating," because I'm out there constantly trying, uncovering things that I'm curious about and that are fascinating. So I'm happy about that. I love that. part.
Absolutely. And so do your readers and your students and everyone else who connects with you, Karen. This has been wonderful. So tell us, we've got the Wine Bible. 3 people in the continental US are going to win personally signed copy from Karen. It's just gorgeous. I expect that this is available wherever books are sold, online, bookstores, and so on.
Yes, it is available online and in all bookstores. And if you would like a signed copy and personalized, perhaps as a gift for the holidays or whatever, you can also buy the Wine Bible on KarenMacNeil.com.
Okay.
And you'll see a little tab for the Wine Bible, and it will allow you to write in there to whom you'd like me to personalize the book and sign it. So that's also another easy way.
Absolutely. And would it be KarenMacNeil.com or winespeed.com where we can get your free newsletter?
Yes, our free newsletter is called Wine Speed.
Okay.
We have about 40,000 subscribers. It is really fun and fast. You can read it in less time than it takes to open a bottle of wine sometimes. And it has a wine quiz every week. It comes to your inbox on Fridays. It is free. We might next year, we're toying with the idea of charging for it, but for now it is free. So this is the time to jump in there and get on the subscriber list.
Sure.
And, the wine quiz, people adore the wine quiz. So many people write to me every week saying, I got the wine quiz right this week. So I think your listeners and your viewers would really enjoy it.
Like the Wordle for wine, but more fun.
Yes.
And is there any other way that folks can connect with you? We've got KarenMacNeil.com, winespeed.com. Is there anything else you want to mention?
Well, of course, we are on social media, Instagram, and all of the other platforms, just with the same handle. It's at Karen MacNeil Co., C-O, like company.
Okay.
So at Karen MacNeil Co.
All right. Karen, this has been wonderful. I've just so enjoyed this. I do want volume 2 of this conversation with you. I wish you all the best. This will be wildly successful, the Wine Bible and all of your other endeavors, your classes, your courses, and so on. So thank you very much for spending this time with us.
Natalie, thank you. I'm honored, really. Thank you.
Take care. Bye for now, Karen.
Okay. Bye, everyone. And thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Karen. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, I love the new and emerging wine regions Karen puts on our radar to try, like sparkling wine from England. 2, she makes a great case for paying more for wine, especially when you do an apples-to-apples comparison between the cost of that overpriced latte and a glass of wine. She's right that we can't want to drink super inexpensive wine and want that wine to be organic, biodynamic, and as natural as it can be at the same time. It just doesn't compute financially. And 3, I'm intrigued by her own line of glassware based on flavor rather than the grape. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Karen, links to her website and books, and where you can find the live stream video version of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. You'll also find a link to my free Ultimate Guide to Wine and Food Pairing. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/210. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or want to win one of 3 copies of Karen's beautiful Wine Bible, or would like to become a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. If you missed episode 170, go back and take a listen. I chat about English sparkling wine, magical blends, and harvest secrets with Janina Doyle. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
If you've never tried English wine, the best to try would be sparkling. Our sparkling wine is actually the closest thing you're going to find to champagne, and not like it's a mimic. When there has been blind tasting competitions, English wine has very often won. About 70% of wine is sparkling wine. And the varieties grown in England are the 3 champagne varieties: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier.
What is it that your wine regions share with Champagne?
It's the soils. The Paris Basin, it's free draining. It's typically chalk, limestone, and clay. It gives you that minerality and beautiful acidity. That same soil type is what we have in England, certainly in the southern part of England.
The White Cliffs of Dover, is that chalk or
It's all
limestone?
chalk.
Okay.
Dover is in Kent, and actually the most wineries, or certainly the top wineries.
If you liked this episode, please email or tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wine tips and stories we shared. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a British bubbly. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.